Hey YouTube, how's it going? Royce here, back with another video. I hope you're doing very well today, and I want to thank you for visiting my channel. So today, in this video, I'm going to be doing something very special. If you're not informed, tomorrow the new expansion is coming out, so I've been spending a lot of time. I pretty much spent all day yesterday theory crafting new decks that I just can't wait to craft pretty much on day one so I can start playing them immediately. So what I've done today is I've gathered together a crop of the 5 or 6 best decks, or I would say most anticipated decks for me to play in the new expansion, that not only are, I think, fairly powerful, but also show off some of the strengths of the new champions and new cards from the expansion, so you can get a taste of them as well, and are just fun to play. Now, most of these decks are pretty original creations by me, but some of them are somewhat inspired by other strategies as well. So I don't want to completely take credit for any of these strategies, and I will try to explain when it's something that is a totally original idea or something that I have borrowed from someone else and modified to my liking. With that said, let's get right into the decks immediately. So, this first deck that I am the 5th most excited to play, by the way, this video will be in countdown style, is Yuumi Pantheon. So with Yuumi Pantheon, we of course remain in Targon, but we leave Demacia for Bandle City. What that provides us is Yuumi, which will help us get our faded triggers and continue to buff up our units, plus assign Spell Shield, if we're lucky and we can get that far. It also gives us a 3rd priority faded follower, so we're not as tied down to the Saga Seeker Wounded White Flame, so I think this deck will potentially brick a little bit less than those typical, like, Pantheon Taric decks. It provides Papercraft Dragon, which is actually our win condition in this deck. The win condition is to take a Wounded White Flame or another faded unit, it could be a Pantheon as well, something like that, give it a lot of buffs that it'll sort of naturally acquire throughout the game, give it Overwhelm, which is very easy to do with something like Zenith Blade or Eula, and then give it Double Attack. And Double Attack on a huge Overwhelm unit is likely going to do like 15 damage and just close out the game right there if you can put this together. Since we're in Targon still, we also have the benefit of quite a bit of Spell Shield, and we also get Spell Shield from these new Bandle City cards. So I said that Yuumi can eventually provide Spell Shield, and we also have Spell Shield from Bastion and Friendship. This deck is working hard to try to get that big finishing combo with Papercraft Dragon. I would say that on the whole it's a little bit more fragile, and a little bit more susceptible to disruption perhaps than your typical Pantheon deck, since we are investing even more in our units. And by the way, I just saw that Wounded White Flame was nerfed to a 2/3. I really don't think it'll change the power level of this deck that much. Wounded White Flame is still a great card, but I'm excited to see if we can get any huge finishes with this Papercraft Dragon combo. So that's my 5th most anticipated deck of the expansion. Let's move on to the 4th. And for this one, we're playing Udyr. Now, if you've been following the community sentiment for the last few days, Udyr has gotten swept under the rug quite a bit as the worst of the 4 new champions. And I do agree that Udyr is probably the worst of them, but I also think that he is being somewhat underrated, and he still has some play and some power that you can draw out of him if you are playing him correctly. So this is a fairly old concept, playing Freljord PNZ with Puffcap Peddler to shuffle a lot of Puffcaps in, but it's new in the sense that we're pairing it with Udyr, and we're using those Puffcaps and those consistent damage triggers to the enemy's Nexus to level up our Udyr. Udyr also has some additional, or rather the stance swaps have some additional benefit in being spell triggers for this Puffcap Peddler, and in being strong when put on something like a Teemo to keep your Teemo more resilient to pings and things like that. Generally speaking, I think that, again, Udyr and stance swaps have been a bit underestimated, maybe not completely, but a bit, and the 0 mana stance swaps are amazing, not just with Puffcap Peddler, but in general, and so we're playing 2 Hiara Allseer and 2 Shaman's Call for that reason. By the way, the only other card I feel like I should explain in this deck, the only other cards are probably Tusk Speaker and 3 Sisters. Tusk Speaker is in here because early in the game you probably will have some trouble shuffling those Puffcaps, shuffling enough Puffcaps to deal damage enough times to start leveling up your Udyr, so we're playing Tusk Speaker for an additional 1 to 2 Nexus hits, 1 from the effect and 1 from the Overwhelm damage. And then Three Sisters is in here just because it's 2 spells for Puffcat Peddler plus its protection. Usually you're going to be generating a Fury of the North or a Flash Freeze, probably like 50% Flash Freeze, like 35% Fury of the North, and like 15% the third one. But yeah, I think the double spell trigger is very nice. Number 3, this is going to be my third most anticipated deck of the expansion, is Soraka Galio. And I was really excited when I came upon this new use for Soraka outside Bilgewater. Now going into it, it does have a few weaknesses. By leaving Bilgewater, you lose out on the ability to have those cards that come down sort of pre-damaged, like your Crusty Codger and your Boxtopus, for example, as well as that like elusive lizard thing that damages itself, and Tom Kench, which is damaging himself through his spells that he generates. But what we gain by leaving Bilgewater is we gain a deck where we're using Soraka to sort of put more pressure on the opponent and be able to have a more aggressive board-centric game plan than that Tom Soraka deck, which is mainly aiming for the alternate win condition. So I would say this deck is primarily a Galio deck with some Soraka support, as usual. She provides some card draw, and she keeps your formidable units healthy, which is very important so they can continue striking for high levels of power. A big part of the formidable package is here. We're playing Sculptor. My choices for the formidable package are specifically Galio, Sculptor, Petricite Broadwing, and Durand Architect. We're not playing the 1-drop, instead we're just playing Fleet Feather Tracker. I think it's just a better card overall. Fleet Feather Tracker also could be paired with the 4-drop, or whatever the 4-drop is that sort of takes damage for its supported ally. But yeah, this is just sort of for board control mostly. And then Durand Architect here has some very good targets. If you can support your Broadback Protector or your Soraka, for example, those are cards that don't already have Formidable that are very strong when granted Formidable. Soraka goes up to a 8 or 9 power unit, and Broadback Protector goes up to a 9 power unit. Very threatening, forcing a block from the opponent. Yordle Ranger is in here as well. I think Yordle Ranger contributes pretty well to the Galio level up condition, and Yordle Ranger is also the strongest thing in the deck. So all of your other cards will have their health buffed, usually twice. If Yordle Ranger can survive the first swing, usually he can, and then you're just getting sort of like since this is a formidable deck, that +2 health buff is kind of like +2/+2, because they're also striking with their power. So I think Yordle Ranger, yeah, it'll help Galio level up, it'll help keep your board resilient and healthy, and apply more pressure to the opponent. Aside from that, we're playing those good Targon combat tricks, Guiding Touch and Pale Cascade, but we're playing Shield of Durand instead of the 2-mana Targon, like +0/+2, I forget what it's called. I think Shield of Durand, I was underestimating it at first, but compared to that card, this is, you know, instead of 2 mana for 2 health, it's 3 mana for 3 health, plus you have the upside of getting more health next round, which I think usually will occur. So this is usually 3 for 5 health, which is also effectively 3 mana for 5 power as well, if you can put it on a formidable unit, like this Broadwing, a Durand Protector supported unit, or your Galio. And then finally we're playing Winds of War and Astral Protection. Astral Protection takes less explanation, I think, but Winds of War is in here to keep your stuff healthy, to try to trigger your Star Spring. By the way, Star Spring is mostly in here as a support card to keep your board healthy. I don't know how good it is as a win condition, and it's sort of the most sus card in the deck right now. I'm thinking about dropping it, but I want to try it first. But in any case, Winds of War can help with that condition. It can also help to like fully heal up your Galio or something if you don't have a Soraka handy, and it's also some much needed removal in this deck, since our only other removal really is this Fleet Feather Tracker, if you want to call it that, as well as the Petricite Broadwing. Alright, so that's my third most anticipated deck of the expansion. Really happy to see Soraka get some more design space in your champion pairing. Third, I want to go into this Overwhelm deck. So if you were playing the game about 7 or 8 months ago, which I actually wasn't, that was a little bit before I came back to the game, there was this Overwhelm deck with like Renekton and Sivir and Sejuani running around, and this is specifically the version from What Am I, who I'll try to link down in the description, a great Runeterra content creator. I don't know if they do YouTube, but they're really big on Twitch and a really cool person. So we've just updated that list for the modern times. So we've added these 3 of Gnar, 3 of Mammoth Shaman, and 3 of Tusk Speaker. I've also decided to add Anything else? No, those are the major additions. So Gnar, Mammoth Shaman, and Tusk Speaker. To make room for those cards, we've taken out our 3 other kind of random champions. We've taken out the 2 of Sivir and the 1 of the 1 of Sejuani. I've also decided to take out the Ruthless Raiders since Tusk Speaker fits a very similar purpose. And then for Mammoth Shaman, I believe I've just taken out the Alpha Wild Claws. So this deck is, it has a very, very similar game plan to that deck. It's kind of heavy on the top end, not too heavy on the mid game, although having these 4-drop champions is pretty important. Gnar, of course, when he levels up into Mega Gnar, is granting enemy units vulnerable, which Renekton can benefit from. We're playing that Battle Fury as a good finisher and also an instant level up on the Renekton. I was considering taking this deck in kind of a different direction, a few different directions, and I'll talk about one of those in a second, but this is the one that is just the most similar to that old, strong Overwhelm deck that just substitutes in some new cards from this expansion. And the reason I'm excited for it is because this is a deck that's already proven itself. This is a deck that can benefit very well from Gnar in a way that I haven't seen other players talk about, and I just think it'll be a perfect combination of like aggressive, strong, but also sort of fresh, and I'm excited to play it. But before I move on to the next like completely new deck, I want to talk about one other version of this deck that I was considering. This one is more of a mid-range version than sort of like a kind of top-end aggro deck, I guess. With this deck, you're trying to pressure on every run possible. So we're playing sort of this mid-game landmark package with things like Endless Devout, Wastewalker, Desert Naturalist, as well as Unraveled Earth. So this deck is, I think, a little bit sus right now. I think that's the second time I've used this word in this video, I'm sorry. It's like a little bit suspicious right now just because the question is like, how well will this landmark package just work on its own? How well will these things line up? Like, will we actually be able to pressure the opponent with these Wastewalkers? Are there enough landmarks to do that between like our Rock Hoppers and our Unraveled Earths? And we're running a few Ancient Hourglass as well to like protect our Gnar and to also trigger this. Wastewalker. Like, how often will Desert Naturalist have to come down just as a vanilla 4-mana 2/4, which would be awful and would be like a major thorn in the side of this whole deck strategy. But nevertheless, to defend the deck, I wanted to try it because the other ones sort of, most of the Overwhelm units are around like the 5 or 6 mana mark, and then sometimes they take a few more mana to get going, especially Mammoth Shaman that I've been placing in these decks. So I wanted a way to try to pressure the opponent in the mid game as well, and to just sort of challenge them to keep up at every possible round rather than sort of giving them this opportunity in the mid game to start to stabilize. Now I will say that this other deck isn't totally defenseless on rounds like 4. It does have Gnar, it does have Renekton, but it's pretty weak on the 3-mana slot, which is the major weakness, whereas this deck is able to play not only the Endless Devouts, but also the Wastewalkers on 3 in addition to the Merciless Hunters. So the question is, like, is this deck stronger enough on round 3 to make up for some of its other weaknesses and some of its potential inconsistencies? And the answer is I'm not sure yet. I'm probably going to be playing this deck first, and then if it doesn't work, I'm going to move back to the 1.0 version. Alright, finally, drum roll, this is the deck that I am the most excited to play in this new expansion, and that's because it is the wackiest, most off-the-wall deck that I built in my theory crafting session, and that deck is Bandle Dawnspeakers. So this deck will take a little bit of explanation. I'm sorry if I get long-winded with it. But for a little bit of background, when all the new Owlcat support was announced in this new expansion leak or release, whatever, cycle, I was like, okay, Owlcat seems strong to seize the board, but how do you win? And you could say, yeah, well, you win by taking the board, and, you know, like, you win in combat. And I'm like, well, maybe, but also, like, these cards are pretty easily chump blockable. You know, there's not that much elusive. We are playing Bandle Commando. There's not any Overwhelm, really. There's not much impact. So if the opponent can just chump you down, maybe they can just win the game. And also, like, what happens if the deck is able to, you know, manages to run out of value somehow? Like, then your Fey aids get really weak, and your Grandfather Fey starts getting, you know, very underwhelming and stuff like that. So I was like, all right, how do we take advantage of those wide board states that this Owlcat deck in Bandle City can generate to actually help us close the game? So I came upon this Demacia pairing after testing out the deck with some other region combinations, namely Freljord and Shadow Isles. And I think this has some really spicy but also strong closeout potential. This has some cards that you're probably used to seeing already in decks like Scouts. We're playing the Cytherea the Bold and Vanguard Sergeant package. It's just as strong in this deck as Scouts, giving things fearsome, giving things more power, demands an answer from the opponent. But we're also playing some more unconventional choices in Dawnspeakers and Lucian. So I think Dawnspeakers fits perfectly well into this deck, where yes, we're going to be buffing up like our Owl Cats and stuff like that, but there's still, the opponent is forced to deal with our board, right? So as they deal with our board, as things die, we're just going to buff up the rest of it with this Dawnspeakers. And this Dawnspeakers is like a priority thing to remove for the opponent, but even if they do remove it, they're not dealing with the rest of the board, which, by the way, is also fairly impervious to board clears like Whale, things like Ruination and stuff, because we've got Spell Shield with all of our Owl Cats, which I can't actually show here because Owl Cat isn't a runnable card in the deck, it's not a collectible card. But with all of our Owl Cats, they have Spell Shield, they'll be coming down oftentimes. Our cards will be coming down, even like the 1 health units will be coming down with 2 health. Because of things like Fey Aid, and because of things like getting buffed by Dawnspeakers, so like even our Loping Telescopes won't be very susceptible to something like Withering Whale. And then our Lucian as well, I want to use to continue to put pressure on the opponent. I think Lucian levels up pretty easily in this deck, not the most easily, but still pretty easily. Even if he doesn't level up, he's still a 2 mana 3/2 quick attack, which is pretty decent, and he might demand removal from the opponent, which is just good for us. And if we can just get those rallies going and sort of attack over and over with these wide and tall boards that the opponent has been chump blocking that they haven't really been able to whittle down, and if they do whittle down, they get punished because of Dawnspeakers, then we can quickly close out the game with those Lucian rallies if we can get him to flip. We're also playing Tristana, which will flip pretty effortlessly with all of the multi-region cards we're playing in this deck. It might seem like not that many because of we're not main decking that many multi-region cards. It's Blastcone Seedling, Grandfather Fey, Loping, Tenor of Terror, and Yordle Ranger, sort of a moderate amount, but all of the Owl Cats that we're generating as well, plus a lot of the Fays that we're generating from things like Fey Sprouts, and cards that we're generating from Loping Telescope are all multi-region as well. So we're running an absolute crazy amount of multi-region cards in this deck. Don't worry about the Tristana flipping. And Tristana is in here, yes, to be like a 12-4 quick attacker later in the game. She'll demand a block, whatever, but she's mostly in here to grant the rest of your board impact and to grant herself impact. Because impact, like Overwhelm, is a keyword that still gets value even if your cards get blocked, and we are going to be forcing them to block. So I think the only downside of this deck might be that, I don't know, maybe some of these strategies won't actually come together in real gameplay. Maybe the Tristana game plan won't have enough impact, sorry for the pun, and those 1 damage pings from the impact damage and from the other multi-region allies won't do enough. I could see having to go off Tristana. I could also see playing this a little bit more conventionally and like dropping the Lucian game plan and just playing like Golden Aegis instead. But what I like about Lucian is he doesn't break your hand. Golden Aegis, sometimes it's like a 4 mana card, and if your board is empty, what are you going to do with it? If you draw Lucian, at least you can play him as a 2 mana 3/2 that also demands removal from the opponent. So this might be a little bit of copium right now, but I think this deck actually stands to be very powerful. Potentially even competitive, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. So this is going to be my day 1 deck on the expansion, and if you'd like to try it, please feel free. The code is going to be down in the description, as well as this Mobalytics link. So that'll do it with the decks. Despite trying to be less long-winded in this take of the video, I still ended up going really long, but I hope you enjoyed it. If you like this video, please leave a like and a subscription on the channel. Videos like this take a lot of time to make, probably about 15-20 hours total, with all the theory crafting and recording and everything else that comes from posting up videos. So a like and a subscription would be highly appreciated, as I mentioned. And if you'd like to see me play these decks, these like specific decks, maybe with a few modifications live on Twitch this week, follow me at twitch.tv/RoyceGaming, also linked there in the description. All right, I really appreciate all of y'all. I've now been doing YouTube for about a month and a half. Sometimes I've been feeling a little burned out. Sometimes I've been feeling like under the weather. I've had a sore throat or whatever. But your kind comments, your views, your appreciation, makes me want to do more of this and keep going as a YouTuber and as a Twitch streamer. So I really appreciate every single one of you. Alright, that'll do it with the sappy message. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you tomorrow. Later.